Hi, I'm the Retro Game Artist and welcome to my channel. What can I say about the original Game Boy that hasn't already been said by other creators on YouTube much more knowledgeable in history, hardware, with much more charisma and production value? Probably not much, but no one is painting the original Game Boy while talking about the Game Boy. Why paint? Because I'm the Retro Game Artist and let's paint the Game Boy. I like to start by a light sketch, pencil sketch of the Game Boy. The design of the Game Boy is iconic at this point. The simple silhouette, the 4 face buttons, the D-pad, the giant bezel, and the tiny puke green screen is very emblematic of the 80s, even though it was released in 89 and most of its life was during the 90s, during the SNES. My favorite feature of Game Boy's design has to be the rounded corner. On the bottom right hand with the grills, and the rounded corner is also reflected in the screen cover as well. I think it just adds a nice little rounded touch that's surprisingly ergonomic to hold. So why am I talking about the Game Boy in 2023 when it's never been a better time to be into portable retro gaming, as we've seen the rise of cheap ARM processor based Chinese handhelds reach into fully premium territory and fill every market niche, and no hassle out of the box gaming experience, reaching PS2, GameCube, and portable gaming PC handhelds capable of running current-gen AAA titles. The sheer number of options can easily overwhelm buyers, with the breakneck development cycles, perpetually on backorder or never in stock. I'm looking at you, Miyoo Mini. And what's become a necessity of blindly pre-ordering a device upwards of a year has started to leave a sour taste in my mouth, and I want to get back to some simplicity. And it can't really get much simpler than the Game Boy. The original Game Boy is called the DMG, after the dot matrix display. The 2-inch screen's got 160 by 140 pixels, capable of 4 colors, all green. And don't let anyone tell you otherwise, the screen can only be generously described as trash. It suffers from ghosting, and getting a usable image with that contrast style was a game in and of itself. Battling dying 30-year-old capacitors, screen rot from the exposure to the sun, which ironically is the only acceptable lighting condition to play the Game Boy, and then needing 4 AA batteries meant that there were no remotes in the house that were working. The screen's contrast relied heavily on power levels. You needed to crank up the contrast as the battery life waned. If you went to high school and have used a graphing calculator, you know what I'm talking about. Oh, and this is all without any sort of back or front light. The third-party accessory space is littered with goofy ways to make the screen a little bit bigger and a little bit brighter. Magnifying glasses with lights built in, the spiral snake thing that used the Game Boy's link port, to some Transformers looking thing that would push the boundaries of what would be considered handheld or portable. The screen is the most usable outside, a double-edged sword considering the long-term exposure to direct sunlight degrades the 4-color panel in a condition called screen rot. The liquid in the LCD will start to bleed out, and eventually the screen will need to be replaced. Now, why did I paint the bezels green? So green is a complementary color to the greenish yellow is complementary color to the purple violet color of the screen protector. Complementary colors are used for shadows and highlights, and Nintendo did a great job of making the green screen stand out as much as possible by surrounding it with the complementary colors of the screen protector. That's very good design work there, Nintendo. The screen also suffers from a little bit of screen rot, and some of the liquid is starting to seep out from the top, which leads me to my grandfather's hammer. That is my grandfather's hammer. I've had it as long as I can remember, and as long as I've had it, it's been broken. The head's wobbly, the handle is pretty crooked and bent, and the pin that's holding the head in is not doing its job. I only really use it to hang up tiny things and serves more as a decoration, because it's not just a hammer, it's become so much more, and it leads me to the grandfather's hammer paradox, or also known as ship of Theseus. It says that if you have a ship and you replaced each part with a new part, will the ship at the end be the same ship? And the grandfather's hammer lays it out even simpler, because there's only simple parts. If you replace the hammer or the handle, is it still your grandfather's hammer? And that's why I've been reluctant to do anything to my Game Boy, because there are options out there. There are IPS displays that will make the screen bigger and have fully backlit so you can play it in any lighting conditions. And that's just something that you cannot do with the original. But for me, I think it makes it a different system. So I think as long as my screen works, I will keep it. And when it does eventually need a replacement, then I'll think about getting an IPS upgrade. Now, I'm not advocating that everyone keep their Game Boys pristine and original. I'm not a hardware purist like that. The only reason why I don't want to do anything to it is because it still works, and I got it for practically free. Also, I didn't grow up with this Game Boy, so it has no sentimental value to me, and I just want to keep on using it like a 30-plus-year-old device. But if you have a Game Boy lying around, a new screen will set you back about the cost of a retro handheld emulator nowadays. More closely to the 35XX than the Miyoo Mini. But for around $70, you can get a screen that will vastly improve your Game Boy experience. It'll be fully backlit, it'll be a full LCD IPS display, and you won't have to ever worry about having to play in the dark or fiddling with that contrast wheel. But therein lies the rub. If you were to buy a modded Game Boy, it would set you back a couple $100. And if you were to buy just a regular Game Boy, like from Amazon or DK Oldies, it'll set you back $150. And that's just too much for a Game Boy in 2023. But hey, if you're willing to spend that kind of money for a refurbished console, then go ahead. Let's say you don't want to fiddle with anything and just want to play some Game Boy games and it doesn't have to be from the original Game Boy. Well then, you're in for a treat. Anbernic 35XX and the Miyoo Mini Plus will fill that role very, very nicely. For about the same cost of a screen mod, you get a handheld that's capable of playing up to PS1, and it has a variety of firmware that will let you do some amazing things like play on the internet, local multiplayer, all sorts of stuff, retro achievements. And if you don't want to do any of that, you can just select the games you want and play without any hassle. You can see both devices because I am sucker for hype. Now, this is just my experience, but the Anbernic offered a plug-and-play experience out of the box and required no messing about with the firmware. And it's been great since day one, and I've had it for a few months now. The Miyoo Mini, on the other hand, is fragile. The SD card got corrupted in day one, and now it serves as testbed of sorts for new firmware, which I also very much enjoy. But let's say you don't want to deal with original hardware or getting a Chinese retro handheld. What can you do? You might have a solution just lying around you. If you have a Nintendo DS or a DS Lite, then you have the capacity to play Game Boy, Game Boy Color, Game Boy Advance, and NDS games, all without having to do anything. Just plug in your card and you're good to go. I would recommend getting a flash card just to make things easier, but if you have a ton of cartridges lying around, then that is the perfect system for it. I personally have a DSi XL because my eyes are terrible, and it doesn't require an additional flash card, just an SD card. It also offers added performance so that emulation of other systems like pretty much the entirety of 8 and 16-bit consoles. Screen resolution will make some systems look kind of terrible on it, but you can still play it. I use the DSi to have all my Nintendo handhelds and up to the Super Nintendo. So, can you still play the Game Boy in 2023? Absolutely. Even on its original screen, get a flash card and you can just have all your Game Boy library on the go. Simple pick up and play nature of a lot of Game Boy games, especially puzzle games, lend very well to just short waiting times and little moments you have in there between, and when you don't want to have to pull your phone out and mindlessly scroll on stuff. But I also realize that for most people, a retro handheld emulator might be the best option. The cheapest option might be whatever you're having laying around, whether it be the original Game Boy or a DS. Modding the DS is as simple as flashing a cart, so in terms of difficulty, there is not that much difference between getting a retro handheld emulator or modding an existing system. What's the most important is that you are able to play. So is the Game Boy the best handheld console in 2023? It can be, depends on who you are. If you love the original hardware, you grew up with it, and you have a cherished one that you grew up with, yeah, keep that baby alive, and that might be the best that might be the best console ever for you. But for the most people, I'm gonna have to give it a no. If you happen to have it gathering dust on a shelf or a box in the storage, dig it out. If it works, great. You're a flash card away from enjoying some of the games that have stood the test of time and will still entertain you, without worries of firmware breaking, settings, or going through apps. Just plug in your cart and you're greeted with that thing. Ah, crap, I need more batteries. Thank you for watching the very first video of the Retro Game Artist. It's been interesting to make this video. The audio, I recorded it a bunch and it got corrupted, so the audio that you're hearing is kind of more on the fly, reacting to myself, I guess. But I hope you enjoyed watching me talk about the Game Boy, Retroemulation, and hopefully you learned about the grandfather's hammer paradox, which I think is just fascinating, just because I am staring at my grandfather's hammer every day. So please leave a comment, subscribe, please tell me what I can do better, and I hope you have a great rest of the day. Thank you.